Hello, everyone. The heat wave is taking a small break. It's only in the mid to high 80s. And it looks over there. Do a little disheveled today. We're going to be reading from, but it's still hot here. We're going to be reading from History of Racial Capitalism. We're going to continue from where I left off yesterday. So let's go. I offer thoughts on the significance of these events to invite readers to question prevalent ideas about race and economy that continue to wield tremendous structural and effective power in the material world. The dream of a profitable real estate market that works for all still powerfully controls the collective American imagination today. And that market depends on simple and routine mortgage foreclosure. Foreclosures enable lenders to recuperate the value of their loans, ensures that they will continue to lend, and remains indispensable because most people still rely on credit to buy property. Property ownership in turn facilitates access to credit, and owning property continues to be key to building household and intergenerational wealth in the United States. That's a term. It's very popular in the black community now, intergenerational wealth. It's been around forever, but it's popular with us now. Because real estate is such an important asset, nearly all property owners hope its value will rise so they can sell their property on demand if they need to do so. They cannot help but feel solicitous of the cash value of the real estate they possess. Another undeniable feature of real estate market is the racial inequities that pervade it. Minorities lack access to the market and face predation on it. Property ownership remains a key source of the racial wealth gap in the United States, and evictions and foreclosures hit minorities the hardest. Many who place their hopes in and praise the market also decry and condemn its inequities. The early history of foreclosure suggests that racialization and foreclosure evolved together to develop crucial elements of the land market and make this market central to economic growth. As it remains now between the present and the early evolution of foreclosure in America, I suggest lies a long and complex story of how the economy came to rely fundamentally and structurally on the sale of land. Unequal bargaining power as a resource and racialization as a key process for producing productive disparities. This essay describes one small episode in this broader story to highlight a generative dynamic between race and economic innovation, which scholars may recognize in other historical episodes. This dynamic belies the idea that the land system fundamentally works, but the racism, unfortunately and unnecessarily, ails it. It demonstrates rather that the intransigence of racism is tied to the unequivocal commitment to the market's constitution, and that race fuels and is fueled by power disparities that produce advantages, opportunities, and profit. Black people never surprised by this stuff, but it's a revelation to everybody else. Race and debt in the American colonies. Two basic aspects of the English colonization enterprise are critical for understanding the kinds of transactional relationships the colonists developed with native peoples after arriving in their territories. The centrality of race and debt as structuring principles of these ventures. More specifically, colonizing expeditions were premised on the use of force according to a fundamental distinction between Europeans and non-Europeans, which will become elaborated as race over the course of colonial experience. Furthermore, they were financed by private lenders which led colonists to manage trade in the settlements in large part by shifting the debt burdens with which they arrived and which they continued to incur to one another. In the colonies, race and debt function oppositely in one sense. For racial distinctions express colonists' sense of entitlement in the colonies, while debt burdened their experiences there. In another, they operate in the same vein for the possibility of shifting debt burdens and creating profitable equivalencies through debt meant that race and debt form two critical resources that colonists could spend at will and at little cost to their advantage. To elaborate, the English first launched their ship under the overarching authority of a legal framework, now known as the Discovery Doctrine, which used the guiding principle of a fundamental hierarchy distinction between Europeans and non-Europeans. To order European nations' efforts to conquer non-European territories among themselves, the Virginia Company's first character, for example, in 1606, granted lands in America to groups in Virginia and Plymouth, and also expressed the hope that the colonists would, in time, bring the infidels and savages living in those parts to human civility and to a settled and quiet government. The Discovery Doctrine's primary distinction between peoples of the world authorized the use of force against indigenous peoples and steered the use of that force in the colonies, providing a framework for developing the practical and ideological dimensions of European colonization enterprises even before explorers set sail. In other words, the Discovery Doctrine unleashed the constraints of European society upon colonists, use of violence in transactions with native peoples, giving them the wide berth to experiment creatively with different forms of coercion. This license to use racial violence presented an especially malleable and nearly inexhaustible resource for colonists, as it cost little beyond their willingness to transgress familiar boundaries placed on the treatment of other human beings, and was therefore one over which they had a relatively high degree of control. Let's do one more paragraph in here. Second, colonists sought charters from the crown under the auspices of joint stock companies, so that their ventures were financed by private entities rather than by the public fisc. Because credit and investment vehicles structured the channels of these contributions, colonists sailed for America with debt burdens and a plan to engage in racial violence to satisfy them. From its founding, for example, Plymouth Colony began in a mortgage condition due to its obligation to the company's various investors. The resources that colonists extracted during the first years were earmarked for repayment to them. The pressure that these arrangements placed on the colonists to make settlements not only self-sustaining but profitable first incentivized colonists to shift their debt burdens both to one another and to native peoples. It also incentivized flexibility and innovation as colonists used a range of techniques to interpret these mandates, from open warfare on native nations to their use of creative and coercive tactics in economic transactions. That is, the colonists channeled their use of force through transactions that did violence both by their terms and in their consequences, such as pursuing agreements to purchase land that were characterized by deception about the terms and fundamentally different viewpoints about which they could be alienated through such a transaction. So you're getting the ideas of how this country started and why it is what it is. Very important information. I'm happy to be reading again, to have the books again, to be sharing videos with you again. I need your support. All of the descriptions are down below. Give support, give support, give support, whatever you can. I know it's hard times. Use the information in the best way possible. We're disappearing, and we're just trying to fight to survive. And I understand that. So let's get informed, let's be mindful, and let's be safe.